for our final panel, The Future, I'd like to introduce our moderator, journalist, writer, and educator, Karrie Jacobs. So with that, if I can have Karrie come up to the podium.
Well, hi. Thank you for inviting me, Frampton. I was on the phone, I don't know, last week maybe with Frampton talking about the panel, and I found myself saying something to him that sounded familiar to me. And I started rooting through these articles that I had written in the 2010s, and it was kind of the middle of Obama, and it was an optimistic time, and I got it into my head that the United States should actually have industrial policy, that we should have a government that was actually encouraging the idea of industry and making things. And I started writing articles about that, and one of them was about the Brooklyn Navy Yard, of course, and I was really impressed by what was going on there and the fact that, digital fabrication was kind of running into other older forms of making things, and it was pretty great. And I wrote a piece about it, and I wrote a paragraph, which is, every time I see an old industrial building newly converted into artist studios or luxury condos, I wonder, wouldn't it be better to convert that old factory into a bunch of small, technologically adroit new factories? What if the Ford Foundation announced grants based on the notion that manufacturers can spur growth in their surrounding areas? Isn't that how economic development used to happen? And the thing that I was thinking about a lot at the time, and still think about occasionally, was that the thing that we'd sort of all accepted as the way to, revive failing cities or old sleepy cities, the creative class theory, that, artists and poets and dancers, and you wanted to attract those people, and you could build new life in the city based on people, kind of like me, and probably kind of like a lot of people in the room, but that if you had manufacturers, unlike writers who sit all by themselves and snarl at people who walk in the room, speaking from personal experience, manufacturers actually hire people. And manufacturers, as has been noted throughout the afternoon, hire people who might not be as, who have a different skill set. And so it lends itself to urban diversity. And so this is stuff I've been thinking about on and off for a long time. And while rooting through these pieces that I wrote in 2010, I actually realized something I'd completely forgotten, which is that I wrote a grant proposal to do an atlas of emerging manufacturers in the United States, and that the case study I used in the proposal was the garment district and the interconnectedness of the manufacturers in the garment district. And I mean, honestly, I had not thought about, now of course I didn't get the grant, which is why I haven't thought about it in all these years, but so much of what I was saying still seems kind of relevant and a lot like what a lot of people in this room have been saying, so it's been really interesting for me. In any case, I would like to introduce the first panelist, which is Rick Cook, founding partner of COOKFOX Architects, a New York-based studio dedicated to high-performance, environmentally responsive design. So, Rick?
Thank you, Karrie, and thank you all for coming out on a Friday. I'm an architect, but my first passion in architecture was actually preservation. The idea that these buildings told stories. They say something about who we are and who previous generations were and what they cared about and how they worked their hands. And that was my first passion, and I started to think about the stewardship ethic around preserving those things. And then the second passion was the environmental movement, and it was really viewed as a sister ethic, and that it's also this idea that we inherit a very rich resource from previous generations, and our job is to be good stewards of those things moving forward. I was going to show two projects quickly, and because there's a panel on the future, talk about a new project that's just underway right now. This is the terminal warehouse. It was built in 1891. George B. Mallory was the architect. It's 711 feet long, and it was a rail infrastructure building. The thing is fascinating. I could talk for half an hour just about the building, but you can see the train coming right out the center. So it was built by the rail company. The building was actually built on the module of a boxcar, all organized around it. So the DNA of the building is this boxcar. It was there to support manufacturing, the critical infrastructural portion of getting goods in and out. And so our job was to find a way to make this building relevant again while restoring it. And some of the things that were just fascinating to me is that you could take this massive, huge building, and when we restored the shutters, we had the original, some of the original shutters. So when we restored the shutters, you can actually see the hand, the little grip of the hand to open and close the shutters. So you can take this massive building and bring it down to the human scale. And these are buildings that add to the fabric of the city. Right behind you in this view is Hudson Yards, a different world. This is the High Line coming along, and then you see the fabric of the historic terminal. We actually carved a light well down in the center and reallocated that area in this penthouse, and you can see the stair at Lehigh beyond. So those two buildings together are about 50% of the Chelsea West Historic District. So these are buildings that were critical to manufacturing, our hard-working Far West Side ironworks, lumber yards, and this was all transportation. The goods would go out across the street to a float bridge and a barge across, connecting literally east and west. Golden Spike was 1865. Another project like this is the St. John's Terminal Building, which was built by the engineers of the New York Central Railroad in 1934. This is the beginning or the end of what we now call the High Line. This is the West Side Improvement Project. We had the opportunity to work on the master plan for this project now over a decade, a uniform land use review process, and we were able to work on the project with Oxford Properties Group. And the idea that we had in common was there's something about this word authenticity. I'd love to talk about that more on the panel. But there was something about the authentic bones of something that really had utility once in its past. And can you reveal it? Can you make it speak to the people who use it? Can you make it speak to the people on the street? And then, of course, as part of the environmental movement, I never saw a horizontal surface we didn't want to plant. So the plantings on the building are actually designed for habitat productivity with our friend Eric Sanderson and David Sider from Future Green. There are over 95% native planted species on the building, under the idea that if you build the right plant community, you'll have the right insects. If you have the right insects, you'll draw the right birds, and we're on the Atlantic Flyway. And this is the building now on the Hudson River Park. Behind it is another building that we did called 555 Greenwich, which connects to 345 Hudson in the Hudson Square area, which were printing plant buildings. These buildings are powerful buildings that take enormous loads, and they read those bones to us. All of that new construction bears on the existing structure, on the existing caissons for the building. In the terminal warehouse, we walked in, there were giant timbers, and I was thinking, this building was built in 1891. The tree that was made from had to be at least 100 years old. I live in a community called Sneaden's Landing up at the Hudson River next to Lamont, Columbia's Lamont Earth Observatory, where the tree ring lab is. They did dendrochronology and tested the timber which was growing in 1512 in the longleaf pine forest of Alabama and Georgia. So now these buildings that we're talking about today, reusing today, have this lineage going all the way back to 1512, and the rail infrastructure that was taken there to harvest these resources. And now we're no longer talking about things that sound fun to talk about, like embodied carbon, which is kind of an engineering concept, which is good, but we're talking about embodied human effort, embodied human craft, embodied human skill, maybe even embodied human suffering in the people who felled these trees and built the railroads. So I believe that as we talk about the future, which is the topic today, I believe deeply that respecting the fabric of these buildings is incredibly important. So while these projects talk about that, in the future now, what we're looking at is our next generation of ground scrapers. We talk about skyscrapers and ground scrapers. If they're the length of a skyscraper is tall, we start to talk about them as earth scrapers or ground scrapers. But we are now working on a project in Red Hook and another one in Bushwick as content creation studios for Echelon Studios and Bungalow. And I think Susie Yu is here, who's our client for those projects. And the idea there is these are brand new buildings, but there's an intensity about what these buildings could be in the future. There's a care to what they are. Enormous loading, a 40-foot minimum height to the bottom of the pipe grid. So there's an infrastructure there. And these content creation studios have scene shops, have wardrobe. There's jobs all related to this, and all of these projects need great infrastructure to get there. So we still need places that we can build these great, powerful infrastructure buildings, and I believe that we need to design them so that they can be reused in the future. And for the future, I was thinking that we do a lot of development work, and developers respond to incentives. And so one of the thoughts that I have is zoning incentives for maintaining historic building fabric, zoning incentives for maintaining manufacturing on site, and somebody just mentioned that. Nina talked about mandatory inclusionary manufacturing. Did I get that right? Or these ideas of maintaining street level uses in the small scale craft. And developers do respond to incentives. So that was my 2 cents for the future. Thank you very much. Glad to be on the panel.
Well, you'll get more of a chance to talk about the future in a few minutes. Next up is Karrie Baker-Rice, Executive Director of the Red Hook Business Alliance, which supports businesses, nonprofits, artists, freelancers, and home-based businesses in New York City's favorite mixed industry working waterfront community.
So you just heard about our mission, and when I started with the organization in 2022, that's what I started working on. And today we're doing that under pressure. 2 recent fires burned over 200,000 square feet of under-market industrial space that won't come back under market. The Brooklyn Marine Terminal plan not only erases 65 acres of IBZ, but through displacement threatens most of the neighborhood. So we are looking to be proactive, and I think I and others have come to the conclusion that this means trying to go get the development we want in a way that preserves and even creates manufacturing and the feel of our community. So we're not just looking to preserve buildings, but also preserve use. A historical note, Red Hook was a 6 to Celebrate neighborhood this last year, and looking at the variety of eligible buildings, very few preserved, we also have historic boats. It's something really special that we have in Red Hook and very unprotected. It's not brownstone Brooklyn, but people, without maybe able to recognize exactly what's historical about it, feel it, and they're attracted to it, and they come down every weekend for it. And I think that's worth preserving. One thing that poses an interesting question for preservation in Red Hook is how we can preserve an ecosystem. Red Hook is mixed in industry, and it is and can continue to be a thriving ecosystem. We have over 700 businesses in a community of maybe 15,000 residents. 5,000 employees come to Red Hook each day. It's an economic powerhouse that you really can't see. Quantifying, tabulating how economic ecosystems are created and sustained can lead us to the right interventions to let them thrive. When the borough president visited in 2023, he said approximately, Red Hook should be a shining example of what this kind of neighborhood can be, and I still believe that. So in Red Hook, we have to be proactive and creative and work with everybody, and to do that, we have to think about it from a business perspective, which I think you just kicked us off talking about. You have to think about the bottom line of development projects. What are the tweaks we need to make to the current system so it changes the calculation and produces something different? That's a riff on a Coro principle, for a Coro audience out here, any of us, that the system produces exactly what it was designed to produce, so we have to tweak it. We need to take examples like we heard about today and create more and scale them so that each property owner, each development project isn't starting from scratch and wasting a lot of budget trying to figure this out, the same problem over and over again. The real estate business by itself is not a very efficient way to solve our space problems, whether it's residential, manufacturing, or open space. Some of this is technical solutions, like how do we do overbuild? How do we create rotating spaces where people can relocate to allow rebuild where it's more efficient? And this is where you get back into the preservation questions. How many floors are we comfortable with in Red Hook, which is known for its low scale? How can we make it easier to build out existing spaces or for shared overhead manufacturing, which we know works so well? We know from a lot of our spaces that we lost in Red Hook that when you do these shared spaces, the stability of the community is incredible. We lost about 130 entities, and a goodly proportion of them had been there 10 to 30 years. This is where the nostalgia critique of manufacturing always gets me. It's rather kind of nostalgic to think that globalization is the last thing that happened in the story of manufacturing. We're talking about business today in New York City that isn't going anywhere and in many places is growing. Thinking about the space needed for them is not nostalgic, it's just good business. So it's worth modernizing our incentive programs, inventing new ones, looking at the bottom lines of how projects get done, tweaking the system, and then scaling those successes. I'll share just one example of something that we've put forward, and this is very much influenced by conversations with Tessa and Esther Robinson at Art Built. We know that any development project, when you have acquisition costs, you lose a lot of the affordability that's built into the lot. We know that a lot of local property owners are not likely to go into a joint venture. That's just not their experience or knowledge that they have. So we're suggesting a program that supports property owners in retaining their property and hand-holding them into joint ventures with experienced affordable housing developers, so we remove the acquisition costs from those projects, and more of the affordability can then stay in, which can then be used for mandatory manufacturing inclusion and also housing. One thing we know we need to protect is the affordability that is built into manufacturing zoning. In Esther Robinson's words, this is a resource. It is built into the zoning. And so when we leverage it just for housing, for a ULURP project that is by definition maximizing profit, we're losing that resource that should be distributed more equitably between the property owner, the residents for sure, and also the businesses and in preserving manufacturing. So those are just a few ideas of how we can look forward to doing this, building the manufacturing back in, addressing some of the problems that really are business challenges that we face. And I'll just echo some of what we heard already today. The businesses that we have that are worth preserving, they aren't always businesses that are looking to hire a bunch of people, right? They might be a one-person shop. But the ecosystem that they are part of, whether it's the restaurant or the vendors or their customers and all of that money staying in the local economy, that's where you get the ecosystem and that's where you get the tax revenue and the benefit for the community. So it isn't always just about counting jobs. And I think that's one of those ways we need to get out of older ways of thinking about manufacturing and counting the number of square feet and the number of employees. That's not the only way we need to count it. We can think about it in more ways. These shared overhead models that work so well in Red Hook really demonstrate how much power and sustainability they can bring to any neighborhood. So I'll stop there because I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Okay, thank you, Karrie. Next up is Jennifer Gutierrez, who is a community organizer, mother of two, council member for New York City's 34th District, covering parts of Bushwick, Greenpoint, Williamsburg, and Ridgewood.
Thank you.
So, all the hot spots.
Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I always forget that other people know that I am indeed a mother. So when I heard her say she's a mother too, I was like, I am present. Good to see everyone. Like was mentioned, I am the council member representing some of the hottest neighborhoods, absolutely. Bushwick, Williamsburg, and Ridgewood in Queens. I live in Bushwick. I'm raising my family in Bushwick. I live blocks away from the Morgan and Jefferson stop, so if those are familiar to you at all, you really have a really good sense of that's really the heart of manufacturing for me in my district. And so I was introduced to advocacy for manufacturing when I was a staff member many years ago for previous council member Diana Reyna. And my understanding of manufacturing was very narrow. Right? I lived near an industrial area, and I think my understanding was like, all right, stuff gets done here. Stuff gets made here. But I really didn't understand that there was a lot more there. I really didn't know at the time just how impactful manufacturing businesses were to the whole workforce economy that uplifted not just New York City, but my particular communities of color. And in the last decade or so of my work here in public service, it has really opened my eyes, and I'm so grateful that the advocates have even allowed for me to like join them in advocating for it, because it has become something that I'm so proud to fight for. I have said it many times, but fighting for manufacturing jobs is sexy, and the more that we can get folks and young people moving to New York, people established in New York to really agree with that mindset, the more work we can do to preserve it. When I was elected, I made a key piece of my perspective into supporting not just jobs, but long-term careers, manufacturing. And it was something that really set me apart from the other candidates who were working, because while they had really good ideas about investing in workforce, investing in pipelines, I said, we've got those jobs right here. We've got those businesses right here in our district, in Bushwick, in East Williamsburg, and we don't have a strong enough fighter in City Hall as a mayor to really uplift these businesses. And I've had the amazing experience of working with Evergreen. I'm very lucky that in my district we have a zone, we have an industrial service provider, so much of my experience and knowledge comes from them. And then once I was elected, I was able to co-sponsor a bill that forced the city in a way to do what it says it does in theory, but has never actually done, which is work with the Department of City Planning and say, we would love for you to plan for manufacturing zones. We would love for you to work with us, with our communities, with advocates and with businesses to say, if you believe in manufacturing, we are failing these businesses now. We are failing long-term businesses, family businesses, immigration-owned businesses that first took a stake here in New York City and just don't really see a future here. And so we were able to collectively pass that legislation, and I was really grateful to DCP and SBS that said we're going to start trying to put something together. We're going to start demonstrating as a city that we care about manufacturing. And so that bill was passed in 2024, I believe, and resulted in a draft plan. I encourage anyone who has a couple of seconds just to look through it, because for the first round, it really put together a really good map or decent map of where we want to work to preserve those areas. The second piece of advocacy that I'm really proud of is even under an Adams administration, y'all, we got some stuff done. We did accomplish some things for the working class, which was specific text amendments to the City of Yes zoning for economic opportunity. Before my colleagues and I, under what's called the M-Zone Coalition, came together under Speaker Adams, there was no talk about manufacturing zones in the zoning for economic opportunity text amendment. It was about 11 to 15 council members, very, very few of us who really understood industrial businesses and their challenges. But we were able to bring in a whole coalition of members who represented not just zones, but businesses to say, if we are saying that this is an opportunity that we've not had since 1961 to change the text amendments, then we'll be damned if we don't include manufacturing businesses. We are failing if we're not talking about them. And so we were able to do that. And while it was not, I think, as sexy as I would have liked, I don't think it got as much attention as some of the other text amendments. What it said, it didn't necessarily say what it could do, but it said what it couldn't do. And in a district like mine, where we see massive venues in core manufacturing, that really put guardrails up. That really said, we do not need this here anymore, because when you allow these large nightlife venues, and I recognize that we're in a college, so if you're here and you've gone to Avant-Gardner, hey, you are in my core manufacturing district, turn around and go home. And so that text amendment really, I think, set the tone. And so as we look forward, I look forward obviously to working with everyone here, but I'm here for 4 more years. And if me and Councilmember Aviles and Farias are your champions, lean on us for the next 4 years, because this administration, I think, has an opportunity to continue that work. And there is no thought in my mind that says if we don't invest not just dollars, but political will, actual political will, to work with these businesses and preserve it and really create a space where people feel like, businesses feel like they can not only stay here, but invest and grow, then I have done my job. I feel successful. So I hope that you can lean on me, and I look forward to continuing this conversation on this panel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Okay, Tessa Maffucci. Did I get that right? Yes. Okay, teacher, researcher, organizer, advocating for ethical fashion economies.
Hi, can you all hear me? Yes, great. All right, I'll be quick so we can get into the panel. I am Tessa Maffucci. I'm a fashion historian. I teach at Pratt Institute currently, and I also help to coordinate the New York Fashion Workforce Development Coalition, a mouthful of an organization, but a partner from the Six to Celebrate for Historic Districts Council, and that was catalytic for us. We are a fully volunteer group of people who want to make fashion and making fashion in New York more feasible. And when we were partnered up with Historic Districts Council, it was like rocket fuel for us to be able to connect with electeds and connect to city planning and explain what we do in fashion and what fashion does in the city. And I think maybe George is still here, who was on the first panel. There's George, yes. So George is one of our beloved members of our coalition, and our group is around 500 small businesses. About a third are manufacturers and makers, specialists, studios like George, and then there's a bunch of folks working in design, of course, which is what most people think about when they think about fashion. And then the rest are other advocates, educators, nonprofits. But really briefly, I just want to say, to kind of situate from some of what I've heard on the previous panels, fashion as an industry in this city, to me, is such a exemplar of these questions around manufacturing and identity and city life. Again, I'm a fashion historian, so my whole background is about how ready-to-wear clothes, what we are all wearing today, this was born here in New York City, this idea that you could buy a garment off the rack, that the way fashion is produced today started in New York and really was born in the garment district. All of those buildings in the garment district, and Andrew Dolkart is the expert on this. The garment district was purpose-built for fashion manufacturing. So someone spoke about how the buildings themselves are part of the factory. That is so true. People like George, glove makers, pattern makers, tailors, all of these people, the way that the floor can hold their machines, the way they can move across the avenues, all of these realities of the built environment in the garment district is why New York City is a global fashion capital. And of course, like all these other making and manufacturing industries, we've been facing this erosion year over year, these encrosive pressures, this displacement, and it's had a really real impact on what people can do and how much new talent can come up and how creativity can be found here. So yeah, I think that's really just what I want to say. I mean, the fashion industry still employs 5% of our private workforce in the city, which is huge. That's only second to finance, which take it or leave it. So anyway, yes, let's go to the panel. I'm really, really glad to be part of this conversation.
Are all these on? I guess so. So we've talked a lot today about the things the city has gotten wrong in not preserving manufacturing and not thinking or planning for manufacturing. Are there things you can think of that the city has done right in recent memory in that department?
Hello.
Well,
Listen, if I can't speak about myself, no, I mean, still the city has not done enough, but I think being able to adjust the text amendment to really define square footage for core manufacturing in that amendment, I would say is something that they had to be dragged to, but they did it right. And then I think passing the strategic plan bill, I think is a step, is a tiny step. But I think, again, just based on feedback and living here my entire life, like there was just no political will to really talk about manufacturing as like a city hall priority.
and the strategic plan bill. Can you just do a brief?
Sure, yeah. It was a bill sponsored by Councilmember Farias from the Bronx and myself. And it was intended to push DCP and small business services to create a plan for manufacturing. They're supposed to create drafts, engage with community, release it. I think it's every 7 years, but it's really intended to make adjustments to manufacturing zones and manufacturing areas with the intention of supporting it. They're also supposed to identify opportunities for funding businesses. And so a draft plan was released, a few months ago. I put out a whole video about how I was disappointed because we wanted it to be stronger. We really wanted to it to send a strong message, and I think they got that message in the tail end of the Adams administration. And there's more work to do there, and I think the positive note there is that is what the plan is intended to do. And I'm not sure if many people here were able to attend some of the workshops that DCP did in the communities, but they just they don't do that. They never did that. They never went out and was like, tell me what you think about manufacturing. And so for me, it was a little tiny inch of success.
Okay. Anybody else?
I think a little bit about, and I'm not, on the whole, I won't say this is sort of all positive. Sure, of course, sorry. But in the City of Yes economic opportunity, there's opportunities in there that need to be made available, made accessible. And one of my pieces of feedback to that was that there's no communication budget around it, right? So we have this opportunity to look at our commercial space, and I love saying this, our unutilized commercial space, which is many and very large, right around the corner here, all the way through Gowanus. That can all be turned into light manufacturing, folks, because the uses right now between light manufacturing, zoning, and commercial, it's almost the same. And so we can be pushing for saying, make it manufacturing on the bottom, because you can use it for commercial if you want to anyway. We can be finding creative ways to build out those spaces for adaptive reuse, not of an old building, but of a brand new one. So I think that there's things built into some of these, some of the changes that have happened recently, that haven't necessarily birthed anything yet, but we have to work towards that, find those, and then make them, again, scalable, right? Make them usable. It's not enough to just have the legislation. It's about translating it into use. And I think that's sometimes where we fail on a good effort, is we don't translate it into making that use like democratic, right? It ends up being used by those who have a retained lawyer on their staff.
Or is that on? Can you hear her?
Might be dead. All right, there we go. Just to follow on that, the idea of like something that is maybe well-intended or even a response to a community ask that then goes awry. So I know it's not really quite in maybe the spirit of your question, but again, the garment district example, this has been this perennial issue. As long as the garment district has existed in Midtown Manhattan, there's been attempts to move it. And where there's so many reasons why that doesn't make sense. But then when these rezoning moments happen, all of the advocacy, all of the effort, all of the research that gets shared back is translated into compromises or crumbs for this community. And one of the more recent ones, and this really is where the group that I'm the part of, the Fashion Coalition, worked with Historic Districts Council on the most recent advocacy in the garment district, was around the Midtown mixed-use rezoning. And what I feel like is so important is that there had already been a rezoning in 2018, and that rezoning had succumbed to the desires of the property owners to allow for more office conversions. So this happened right before office use, went off a cliff.
All of a sudden, nobody wanted the
was
office
not so
space.
important.
Yeah.
But the compromises that were offered at that point, when it was a huge exposure and loss for the manufacturing community in Midtown, was that the city promised these various things. They promised the acquisition of a building, a permanent, sustainable, affordable space for makers in Midtown. They promised that funds would be allocated to that and that would happen. They also promised that there would be a tax credit to incentivize property owners renting to these manufacturing tenants. And then there were other kind of funds and programmatic things that were promised. And so when we first heard that the Midtown rezoning was coming down the line, the first thing we did was say, can we check in on what happened in 2018? Because literally none of that came to fruition. No building was acquired. No property owner ever enrolled in the tax abatement program, the tax incentive program. And again, all of these other programs were fractionally funded or utilized. So I feel like it's exactly this challenge where it's like we're fighting for crumbs, or we're kind of saying, okay, a promise was made, but now what?
So in the recent Midtown rezoning, there was a set aside for manufacturing. Is that crumbs or is that real?
Well, of a kind. I mean, it was our biggest win, I think.
Yeah.
It was to get a place in the district that wasn't going to get fully upzoned.
Yeah.
But it didn't incentivize manufacturing, it just allowed it. So it's the same issue, which is that it's not incentivized, it's just permitted.
Okay, Rick, did you want to jump in here, or you think?
Well, we're still trying to understand the full implications of City of Yes. There's a lot in there, and so I would just say it's worth a deeper dive. Very, very few projects have been built there, and there were things done to help projects get accomplished.
Okay, I mean, I sort of most recently came into this when I pitched a story to the nation about Bush Terminal, which the last conversation I had with anyone about it was several years earlier. So I still thought the intention was to move the garment district there. And then once I actually started working on the story, I realized, no, that isn't happening. And the official version I got was, well, COVID happened, and so the garment manufacturers, the financial pressure on them to move wasn't there. And then as I talked to more people, I realized, well, actually the garment district didn't especially want to move to Brooklyn. And it seems like the sort of thing that city government should have understood in the first place. And I don't know. I just wonder about how those things happen.
Yeah, I mean, not continue to focus on the garment district, but I think, yes, it is a evidence to me of a huge gap in data. And this is something I feel like we talk about so often, that the data around manufacturing is just non-existent. And so, the estimates that we can gather is that there's 1,000 small businesses still in this tiny 1-block radius in the garment district. But no one is doing that outreach, that door-to-door, that connection. So that's actually a project we've started with the Fashion Coalition. Is we do volunteer canvassing days once a month, and we get people in our group, and we go door to door, and we knock, and we say, like, are you still here? What are you making? We've connected with around 330 businesses so far, and this is just over the course of 5 months. So there's a huge amount of information that's just not available.
And how are you going to deploy that information? I mean, is that something that general public might be able to see at some point?
The more immediate hope is to just make a directory to say, if you want to make something here, here's where to start, and to make that information as available as possible. But I think the secondary goal is to use that to organize around building acquisitions or building conversions, or maybe conversions is the wrong word, but activations toward manufacturing. So there's folks in our group who are trying to figure out a way to condo out spaces in the garment district or create these innovation hubs in the garment district, but it's a really big uphill project.
I mean, just to go back to the question of the edges, I think it's just something we've talked about as well. I have this crazy task of trying to rehome 130 businesses right now, and people are just telling me like,
From
well,
the most recent fire.
two of them,
Two,
yeah.
okay.
And people are saying, well, the Brooklyn Navy Yard and Industry City, and some of these folks don't want to be there. Some of them rely on foot traffic too and add to foot traffic, and that's not a good place for them. If you think
Right.
about artist studio type spaces, you're losing the ecosystem when you push everything to the edges. And BMT is another example of this, where the city is, well, we'll put a whole bunch of manufacturing on city property and we'll make sure the prices are okay, but they won't promise a number. And sometimes I'm also rehoming businesses. Right now, rehoming a business coming off of Brooklyn Navy Yard because the prices are going up. So I don't think the future of manufacturing is on the edges of town, and I don't think it's on city-owned property. We have to think about this, and I think you've spoken really eloquently about this, about how much culture these industries bring, and that they are integrated into our communities and into the fabric and life of New York City. We don't actually want them, even if we're not manufacturers. I don't think we actually want them as New Yorkers on the edges of town either.
The thing that number of people said today is that city planners don't get manufacturing, or they don't care about manufacturing. I'm just wondering why that is. Is there something in the nature of, in the culture of planning, or is it? I don't know. Any theories or thoughts on?
If I can jump in and theorize, and I'm not going to speak specifically to planners, because maybe I don't know that audience well enough, but I think it's a more general social and cultural lack of awareness of planning, of manufacturing. I say this because I am an educator, first and foremost. I work with young people, college students all day who want to be designers, and most of them come into a fashion design program and they've never touched making tools before, right?
Yeah.
Like they haven't been familiar to this world. And I just mention it because some of the peers that I have in teaching, who've been teaching much longer than I have told me that students used to come in with this level of tactile knowledge that they just don't have anymore. They don't know how to hold a needle. It takes months for them to even get that level of fluency. And I think, again, George spoke about this earlier in the panel. The pleater in the garment district spoke about how it takes so long to train someone to do this work.
Right.
So I guess it doesn't answer the planner side of the question, but I think there's a general loss of knowledge about how things are made. And so as a result, the people who are in positions to make those decisions generally don't have the knowledge, and maybe you're an exception.
Well, no, I barely have the knowledge. And I'll just say from my experience working with a bunch of different urban planners, I think for those that work in the city, manufacturing does not have this level of energy or preserving manufacturing that the housing crisis does, right?
Yeah.
And to be completely honest, the job market is also, we're also in a crisis when it comes to careers, to jobs. And for me in my district, I'm manufacturing is that response to that. But it doesn't have this, doesn't roll off the tongue. We're constantly switching up manufacturing zones or manufacturing industrial versus non-industrial. And so that doesn't impact people, I think, daily as their literal housing does. And so I think from a political side, we have just not had someone at its city hall. We've not had a strong administration that says what they're going to do when it comes to jobs, that says what they're going to do when it comes to manufacturing. And I think if you're a planner working in New York City, you're also looking for work, so you're going to go for where
Right,
it is. And
right.
the focus consistently for the last 25 years has been around more density, more housing. And even if it sacrifices manufacturing like it did in Bushwick, then that's what an urban planner is going to do. So I think it is that, and I think it's it has been really, really hard in my experience to get more people in government, policymakers, to talk about manufacturing. I mentioned the M Zone Coalition, which is it's just a gang of council members trying to uplift manufacturing. And we had to start on page one almost every single time, reminding people where the manufacturing zones are, what the tax amendment does, what the zoning code does, how it limits, how it doesn't limit. And it's hard. It's hard to do. It's hard to constantly refresh it. So I think I think that has been part of the challenge. There hasn't been this like champion for, at City Hall for manufacturing, and then it just kind of works its way down, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't recall anyone running for mayor talking about manufacturing, but I may be forgetting
I really
something.
tried, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Rick, did you want to say something?
Well, I was interested in something that Karlie said, where New York City is a rich place of neighborhoods, and people come to Red Hook, and this is the word I mentioned before, authenticity, because there's something special there. There's something completely unique, and it's hard for city planning to legislate around it, but you know it when you see it. And I was wondering if there's any data about the visitors to Red Hook, because we love to see things made. I want to live in a city where there's a fashion district and people are still making things, and I think most people do. So city planning does legislate retail continuity, for example, because they know that you need to see things on the street, and they're careful about loading docks. But maybe it's building more awareness about what you're seeing, about how the neighborhood people just want to see where cool things are happening and artists are working and manufacturing is happening. I was just wondering if there's any data around that yet to support it.
I mean, we did a commercial district needs assessment that gathered certainly survey data, but then also kind of all of the different. They don't let me count suite-based businesses or studios and that kind of thing, but they do let me count, anything that you can kind of walk into and you're intended to walk into. And sort of, I think part of what speaks to that is we have a lot of businesses that are manufacturing and service and retail, and you can do all of them, right? You can go to the chocolate factory and take a chocolate making class, and you can also buy chocolate. And they also do on-site catering. So that's really unique, and I think part of what's magical about it, which you probably don't want to hear, is that you can't design it. You can't. It is grown. Red Hook has this crazy mix of zoning. If you look at it on a zoning map, it's like every color. But what is there is only there because it grew on top and on top and on top, and it was negotiated over decades. And you can't replace it. All you can do is try to figure out what's working and pick the interventions that help it thrive more. And that's what I think we have to figure out how to do. That's what people like me are here to help with. But I think we try to do like one-size solutions across the city, and it misses what you're saying. It misses the magic, and it refuses to kind of say, there's something working here. Let's figure out what makes it work and then help it work better.
Well, I think one of the problems consistently is that communities are really good at organizing to say no to things. But they're not so good at organizing to figure out what they want and how to get whatever that is. And, I don't know if that, skill magically appeared, whether manufacturing would be the thing that they'd be organizing for. But it could be. I don't know.
I think you're right. I do think that in the instances where communities have organized in some kind of way, they have not been rewarded for their organizing, right? And so I think what you run into is communities that are fatigued. They're fatigued of like meeting and doing the simulations of what would it look like here. I mean, in my district alone, the previous council member worked on the Bushwick community plan for 4 whole years before the 2 mayors ago said there's not enough density, so we're walking away. And the community was like, what the hell did we just do for 4 years? What did we just sacrifice? Hours, weekly. Lacey Tauber is here from the borough president's office. She was working, sacrificing nights and weekends doing this. And so I think sometimes I can't point to very many examples where a community is able to successfully come together, organize, say these are the things we want, and it gets done. And an administration in the local sense will respond to that. It is easier to organize around saying no, we don't want this. But you can also say we don't want to lose jobs here. And that's something that we're constantly trying to do in my district. And we're trying to elevate the importance and the value of manufacturing, reminding them that 80% of them are people of color. It's a low barrier to entry. People that work here have careers, have homes, are paying for their kids to go to college. That's transformative in just one generation. And they can do that at an industrial job.
Yeah, 1,000 times. I mean, I've had to name it in Red Hook, and I call it advocacy swamping. We are so fatigued that, like, for the last ULURP, nobody showed up. And that's not my neighborhood. We show up, but we're so fatigued, But I will say that we have a 197A plan. It was the third ever created, and it absolutely talks about manufacturing and local jobs. Yeah.
Williamsburg has too. We're constantly referencing it. Yeah.
So I will say, I hope my beginning talk foreshadowed that I'm here to work with people to get stuff done and do the development that needs to get done in the right way. And that is a coalition building task that I feel is sitting with myself and some of my colleagues in Red Hook right now. But it's a tough task given what else is on our plate right now.
Okay, and do you think it's a preservation issue, or is it a different kind of issue? I mean, there's one issue which is preserving historic manufacturing buildings for, some new use maybe. And then there's the other issue, which is preserving manufacturing. And to me, the two things are different, are different issues. I don't know.
And the other overlay is character, this other soft thing. Red Hook has a feel to it. Bushwick has a feel to it. And when you lose the uses that add to that feel, then you somehow lose the very quality why you fell in love with the neighborhood. Meatpacking district is going through that right now. People flock to the meatpacking district.
Oh boy.
It was cool, right? And it was interesting. And now we've lost all the meatpackers, and it's under a lot of pressure. So the big question is, how do you build enough support for this idea that we need to protect and preserve not just the buildings, the bricks and mortar, which is, as an architect, the kinds of things that make sense to me. But on the other side, how do you preserve the quality of the ecosystem of uses that make the character of a neighborhood, fashion district, or manufacturing? People love to be makers. There's a maker culture, but it's not like a little retail, after work kind of thing. This is real, as you were pointing out, real jobs, real careers, passion projects for people.
Well, 5 minutes left. Okay. I don't know. The word nostalgia came up in the list of questions for this panel. And I just wonder if the fear of losing the things that you have fallen in love with a particular neighborhood, or the loss of authenticity, is that nostalgia, or is that something else?
Really existential question.
Yeah, that's a biggie.
Are those not allowed?
No, totally. I mean, I think it is nostalgia, and I think it's a completely viable reason to want to fight for something. I think it's a completely reasonable thing to want to organize around, especially when it's coming at something. You're not you're fighting for a particular job. For example, when the City of Yes drafts came out, immediately for us in our community, we were like, who are our biggest manufacturers that have been in this fight for such a long time, that employ so many people? The Boar's Heads, the Greenfields, the Wonton. We want to make sure they're at the table. And for me, it was I don't want them to go anywhere, because I love passing by Verret and smelling noodle, wonton. I love that. I love that when I'm walking home from the train, the folks that work at Boar's Head, they're also on their way out, and we're just two workers coming home. That is a reason to organize around. It's nothing to say, I think we have to, when it comes to manufacturing, find a reason to drive why nostalgia is valuable to this industry, because we can see it literally getting up, walking away, and going to New Jersey. We can see it walking away from our neighborhoods. It's not something that we missed. It's something that we're actively watching go away. And I think it's a reason to organize around.
I think there's a difference between the value that we see in it and nostalgia, which I think is the nostalgia we all want to critique, which is kind of more relating to something as though you were actually living in the past. Your social, political body, you prefer the one from 50 years ago, and you're not really representing today. I don't think that's what you're talking about. I think what we're talking about is real value that a social, political, responsible, ethical person sees value in today. And if we're thinking about the changing job market, what is of more value than the physical stuff that has to get done in New York City every day? That's hugely valuable. We might like it because we've liked it for a long time, but the value we find in it is present and relevant today. It's not old. It's not us wanting to go hide in a ditch. It's relevant.
Well, I think one of the things we learned during COVID was that the supply chain was a little too long, that it needed to be a little shorter, and some things that we would benefit from having some things closer to home once again. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think speaking to that, like, nostalgia question with fashion, that's something that always is kind of thrown back of like, well, no one needs to make clothes here anymore. That's just not relevant. It's not been relevant for a long time. And first of all, it's just not true. There is still a huge amount of production in all of these different sectors that's still happening here. But I think the piece that feels really profound to me is the ways that these systems have gotten so broken in our recent years. So, of course, fashion is the world that I'm steeped in, but like almost all of us, I mean, no, actually I can say guaranteed all of us are wearing clothes that were not made in ethical conditions, right? So whether those were environmental impacts that certainly happened or human labor issues that happened, there was an absolutely damning study that said that some 90+% of our clothes are touched by human child labor, which is horrifying. I mean, all three of us are mothers on this panel, and like to imagine that I'm clothing my children in clothes made by children is horrifying. And that happens when a supply chain is so dislocated. Like that happens when you're not looking at how something's made. And of course, abuses can happen in our backyards too, but I think we had this whole labor movement. Like we go back to the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire and how that changed labor movement in this country. That was because Frances Perkins walked by the fire. I mean, it's like these are the things that are the deeper reasons why it matters where we're making things. Not,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm told it's time for Q&A.
Okay.
So, do we have any cues? We have some way in the back there.
Good afternoon. My name is Shanae Lee from Friends of Abolitionist Place. And boy, oh boy, this was such an interesting topic. So I want to actually mention from Councilmember Gutierrez, the sexyism, how we can get it.
Do you like it, or I'm workshopping it?
Yeah. Well, here's a couple of things from listening to you all. I think to see the value, it has to be multi-generational how we attract it, to people, because young adults, I think they see you when you mention manufacturing, you think of factories, you think of pollution and all of that. So maybe you could talk about how we could coordinate sustainability ecologically with the manufacturing, and also for the young people, because there's some children that I know that don't even know how to use scissors correctly, just like the gentleman was talking about earlier. So what about pushing for trade in the schools again? Because I learned economics, home economics, like sewing and woodwork in schools. So that would bring the trade back again, and for people who are not wanting to go to college but to learn a particular trade with their hands. And also just the historical part of it. Bring in the elders, bring in, the seniors who know what it means to work with your hands and how their mother or father used to go to the factory. Let them engage in sharing their stories. Because when you know a person's story, you can't help but love them. That's from Mr. Rogers, by the way. But, yeah.
Mr. Rogers knew.
Yes. Make it multi-generational. The elders could bring the stories that, were erased, that needs to be brought up again, because then you'll have some type of connectivity. And they're involved. And the young adults, like I said, bring it in like a clean way where we can have the sustainability and all of that, and education. Thank you.
A couple of questions over here. I love it. Thank you. So we got two here.
Thank you very much for your comments. I wonder how many New Yorkers know about the number of manufacturers that are doing the kind of highly skilled work, and where their factories are. And the word my dad ran a factory, and it was this gigantic plot in St. Louis, this huge horizontal building, and they manufactured stainless steel operating equipment. And I grew up in a period in St. Louis, which is 10 years at least behind the East or the West Coast. You knew if the father was a professional, or if he ran a factory, or exactly, we were aware of factories. I don't think for these smaller businesses that require tremendous amount of training, we have either the pathway through education, including the city college level. We don't have it, but I also think that people who aren't living immediately proximate to a small business realizes how many of these businesses are there. There's no publicity. I don't know if you can do making it in the Central West End, making it in, you can have a day when you celebrate a selection of smaller businesses that do highly skilled work.
Well, we may still need an atlas, or a lot of atlases. There was, right behind her. Right there.
Some of the people sort of touched on what I was interested in commenting on, which is the transition of knowledge that we've lost because of the fewer jobs in manufacturing. It used to be everyone had someone in their family who made things, but now they don't, and that's why they don't know how to hold a hammer. And I have taught people the right way to hold a hammer on my ship. And I hope those of you who know how are doing that. But another problem I have on my ship, we're very dependent on volunteers for restoration. And the skilled blue-collar people cannot afford to retire in Manhattan, and nonprofits that do the kind of work that we're doing at my ship depend on those retired skilled people, and they're not here. They're in Staten Island. They're probably out in Bushwick. They're in New Jersey. They don't want to drive into Manhattan. Do you know what a headache the parking and the traffic is? And now we have congestion pricing, and my nonprofit's in Tribeca, Jesus. It's that connectivity is important, and we've lost a lot of it. And the other thing I'll say from the preservation perspective is people don't value it if they can't see it. When we were trying to save the graving dock in Red Hook, the people in the Red Hook houses didn't know why they should help with that, even though the graving dock was still in use. When IKEA bought the site, the number of workers had dropped so far that none of them were from the neighborhood anymore, the few people who were still going to work there. And so they had no connection to it, and it was hidden behind a wall of buildings. They didn't know what happened there. So how could it be important? So we have to let people in, too.
Right in the corner there, right behind you, Frampton.
Hi. I just want to say everything's been very inspiring here, and I've been really kind of rejuvenated. But I also wanted to just point out that we haven't talked very much about real estate pressure, and I think that's really the most important thing. And I was the planner for Greenpoint Williamsburg before the rezoning. And I did a waterfront study, and I opened doors, and I came back with ground level research, and I was working at city planning, and I shared that ground level research. And planners that be wanted me to throw my maps away and not share because of the real estate pressure. And I think we have to acknowledge it, and that's one of the main things that we need to try to come up against, which is big. I mean, I think lack of awareness, I mean, for years, the planners at city planning had the information. It wasn't that they didn't have the information, and it wasn't that they didn't know. It's that they had pressure from real estate. So I just wanted to bring that into the conversation and have you all comment on it.
I think that's the answer to a lot of questions in the city, generally.
That was great. Thank you. Thank you for reminding us, and thank you for your work in Greenpoint. 100%. I think it is. In 2005.
Yeah, I've heard that story too.
Absolutely. Communities don't get rewarded for being proactive, or never have, absolutely. But I just want to uplift what you said about real estate in a community, a gentrifying community, I'm sure in Red Hook as well. I mean, even for manufacturing, like property owners, they are now aging if they've had the property for a long time, and it's easier to sell their property to a real estate developer. It's literally easier for them. And it's because they've not had the support that they needed. They have these vacant lots. They're looking for good long-term tenants, and it's hard. It's so challenging for them, and it's easier to fold in. And I get it. For those that went into this as like a retirement plan, I understand. But there is this general, we all know this in New York City, where there is this like caving into real estate pressure. They have all the money. They don't worry about money in the way that like any other kind of business does. And so it makes it impossible. It makes it very, very difficult. So I just want to uplift what you said, because I think that is a real, I've had businesses that want to grow, but cannot afford to grow where they are in Williamsburg, in Bushwick. And so it's not that the interest isn't there, it's just they can't afford to.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this conversation today. My name is Leo. I'm a graduate student, urban planning graduate student at Rutgers Blaustein. And first, I just want to speak in defense of my profession. Planners, we do
You made the right choice. You made the right choice.
I mean, I'm here, right? I'm very interested in what it means to continue to build and grow and preserve a fabric of a city, right? And what makes it unique and what allows that character to make it so interesting. I think in like what I've heard today, there's a lot of defense of the historic aspects of manufacturing and this architecture, and I think that's fantastic. I think we absolutely need to be doing that. But then in thinking of the future of the city and thinking of how, like for instance, the IBX, right? That is an important part of the growth of New York City, and it will bring significant change, good and bad. But I think that in conversations like this, we tend to cloister ourselves too much, right? We don't allow ourselves to communicate with other groups that have potentially that same interest in preserving while also growing. The IBX will serve to benefit the community, but it can also serve to greatly benefit manufacturing as well. And I think that's a thing I've experienced in not just my, in these conversations, but in classes as well. Planners tend to kind of fall into the role of a technician and not of a larger thinker. And I think that all of you on the board here are planners as well, right? And so it's just a level of taking that conversation further and with the larger groups of people and with other departments. So yeah.
A couple. There's one right here and one way in the back. Oh, one right there. Okay.
Hi, this has been fascinating. I agree, manufacturing is sexy.
Yes. Workshop complete. Thank you.
I think capitalism has ruined our understanding of what manufacturing is. It's the Detroit automotive factory floor that doesn't take human beings into account, or it's microchip factories in China that are so highly mechanized and very, very efficient. There's a real opportunity in New York to capture the sexiness of manufacturing and the maker movement, that whole orbit. I think it's isn't Etsy based in Dumbo? So I'm wondering, is there a manufacturing bridge between people who are selling on Etsy, and largely it's made at home, and they're growing and they can't keep up with it, but the minimums to send things offshore is so prohibitive. So capturing that, I think, is a huge opportunity in New York.
Thank you. Okay, I think, are we out of time, or?
I think we are out of time because this conversation could go on a lot longer. And we invite you to the reception immediately behind this space to continue the conversation with our panelists. And please give Karrie and all of our panelists another round of applause. We will be following up with everyone. As I said, we'll have a report. This has been recorded, and please share this. And now join us to the reception. Thank you again.